Hello everyone, welcome to today's webinar from me in both a very soggy, very sunny Hastings today. Just to let you know, we're also going out live on LinkedIn Live this time. So hello to everyone joining us there too. We may just have to make a few adjustments to go live on LinkedIn, but we'll keep you posted. So we'll just give it a few more moments for everybody to join. Do feel free to drop into the Q&A box if you're on Zoom and say hi. We've disabled the chat feature as we've discovered it can cause problems for some people using screen readers, but the Q&A option is still live. Okay, I think we'll make a start now. So hello everyone and welcome to our webinar, Attitudes to Accessibility Are Changing, a Global Perspective. I'm Annie Mannion, I'm Digital Marketing Manager at AbilityNet, and I'll be running you through today's session. So thanks for coming along. Just to go through a few bits of housekeeping. As I mentioned, today we're hopefully also broadcasting live on LinkedIn. So hello to all joining us via that platform, and I'm glad you could make it. We have live captions provided by Paula at MyClearText. You can turn on the captions using the control panel, the CC option on the control panel. And additional captions are available via streamtext.net/player !event equals AbilityNet. And slides are also available at slideshare.net/AbilityNet and also on our website at abilitynet.org.uk/attitudeswebinar. And if you have any technical issues or you need to leave early, don't worry, you'll receive an email in a couple of days' time with the recording, the transcript and the slides. And then depending on how you joined the webinar, you'll find a Q&A window. So if you want to ask the panel any questions, do drop those in the Q&A area, and any that we're unable to answer today will be added to our website at /attitudeswebinar. And just a quick reminder, we've switched off the chat feature as we've discovered it can cause problems for some people using screen readers. So do use the Q&A field for any comments. And then finally, we'll also have a feedback survey that you'll be directed to at the end. So please do complete that if you're able. So moving on to the next slide, if that's okay, Freya. So for those of you who aren't yet familiar with AbilityNet, we're now celebrating our 25th year this year, and we support older people and disabled people living with any disability or impairment to use technology to achieve their goals at home, at work and in education. And we do this by providing specialist expertise and advice, accessibility and inclusion testing and training to organisations, and also by offering free information like our fact sheets and this webinar. So today we're going to be discussing the results of our 2023 survey into attitudes towards digital accessibility. So if you could move on to the next slide, that would be great. Thank you. So we're going to be sharing how they're changing around the world. And so to discuss the topic today, we have joining us, who hopefully you can see on screen, Christine Hemphill, who's founder and leader of Open Inclusion, a disability and age inclusive research agency. And also joining us is Christopher Lee, who's managing director of IAAP, the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, and also G3 ICT, the Global Initiative for Inclusive ICT. So we'll be sharing the top line results of the survey with you and discussing their implications in just a moment. But before then, I'd just like to gauge your opinions on an anonymous poll. So I will just launch that now. And apologies for those of you joining us on LinkedIn who may not be able to see the poll. but you can leave your responses in the comments field within the event. So do you think your organisation is an accessibility leader or an accessibility laggard? So by laggard, we mean those who are being left behind or are moving slowly. So if you can choose between leader, laggard, don't know, or not applicable. And again, depending on how you've joined, you may find you can't see the poll, but do make a comment in the Q&A panel if you wish. So I'll give it a few more moments for anybody else that'd like to vote. Ooh, it's showing nearly neck and neck, but I'll just give it, yeah, one more moment and I'll end the poll there. And the results are showing us, it's 43% are saying accessibility laggard, 38% accessibility leader, 16% don't know, and then 3% not applicable. So thank you, everybody. It's useful to gauge the opinions of everyone joining us. And now, to help us reveal what the attitude survey tells us this year, I'd like to welcome Christopher and Christine. Christine, if you're able to, first of all, summarise the findings from Open Inclusion's analysis of the survey results, that would be great. So over to you, Christine.
Thank you, Annie, and absolutely lovely to be here for the second year we've been involved in this survey of attitudes to digital accessibility, and it's been a really interesting year where actually disappointingly some of those attitudes have gone backwards year on year to last year, and that's been kind of one of the highline findings, not by a lot, but the fact that it's not progressed and generally gone backwards has been interesting. And the other thing is, yes, this split between, we're seeing some organisations progress forward and feel more confident and more comfortable, and we're seeing some feel further behind. So it felt like there's been a bit of a dividing of the paths. So just in terms of overview, 373 respondents completed some parts of the survey or all of the survey, so that are in the analysis in the various question areas. As I mentioned, it does feel, in terms of the analysis of it, it's falling into categories of those that are ahead on multiple characteristics and those that are behind on multiple characteristics. So what we mean by leaders is across the various characteristics of the questions, vision, leadership, processes, capability, and procurement. There are some that are ahead on a number or all of them, but many of those characteristics, and some that are falling behind or less confident on a whole range of those elements. In terms of who was involved in the 373, get it the right way around this time, respondents, we had about a third were small and medium-sized enterprises, so organisations under 250 people, and about 2/3 over 250 people. So just in terms of size and in terms of types of organisation, a little bit more in government, so about 40% government, 35% business, and just over 20% charities and not-for-profit. So a really nice spread of different organisation types and different organisation sizes, but also people in different roles within the organisations. So in terms of the high-level summaries, as we'll see this year, there's been some interesting changes. Not super significant, but some little bit lower than last year on a range of characteristics. So a little bit, we'll talk about it when we talk about capability being embedded, but whether it's around digital accessibility being a priority, clear vision, so my organisation has a clear vision around digital accessibility, embedded throughout the organisation, skills development in the organisation, and purchasing practices. We've seen on all of them, except for purchasing practices, a minor shift down, and on purchasing practices, a minor shift up.
Thanks, Christine. We'll discuss the findings in a bit more information, a bit more detail in a moment, but I'd just like to welcome Christopher, and if you'd be able to say a bit more about your involvement in digital accessibility in general, and then I'll hit you with some questions in detail.
Sounds great. Thank you, Annie. Christine, it's always good to be here with you. IAAP was formed with the idea that we want to embed accessibility professionals into organizations. And the research, the focus group that was done that formed the association really led more towards digital accessibility. Not so much the built environment, even though we address the built environment now on some levels. So organizations, I'm thinking about the 35% businesses here and the government, respondents and so on, the nonprofits, need to, as Christine mentioned, the importance of upscaling skills. So IAAP works towards that through education, through certification, and through networking. Those are the three main areas. So this is definitely the results of the survey is very important for us to understand, and we appreciate AbilityNet moving forward with the survey each year.
Well, yeah, thank you for joining us, and I think you're both in really great positions to be able to digest the results and give your expert opinions on them. So just moving on to the first question, we've got one of the main motivations that we've found cited for being digitally accessible is meeting legal requirements. So how can organizations, in your opinion, be encouraged to make cultural changes for everybody's benefits? Christine or Christopher? Yeah, whoever would like to go first.
Oh, you go first, Christine.
I'll follow up.
Okay, sounds good. So we at IAAP, we have organizational members as well as individuals members, and we the feedback that we're getting from our members day to day, more from the standpoint of just listening to them, not so much doing surveys in a sense, even though we do an annual survey, not like this particular survey, and we are seeing the same thing. With all organizational members that range from IT to consultancies through government agencies to academia, to telecommunication, healthcare, you name it. We are pretty much in almost every sector out there regarding our membership base for organizational members. And we have individual members also that feed into a lot of those organizations and sometimes on their own. And we're seeing the same thing. There's continues to be, especially in North America, legal concerns around accessibility. So we look at our benefits, how we are supporting our organizations to ensure that we're giving them what they need to do that. We're seeing, it's interesting, we're seeing some of the organizations coming down from top leadership saying that we need to be accessible. So there's a fraction of those organizations, and that's really good. When that happens, obviously there's more of a strategic plan that is threaded through the organization regarding digital accessibility. But we're also seeing, which is really nice, champions. And this is what we really been trying to promote. With the middle level folks, the managers, pushing up to the top. These are the champions within the organizations that are saying, we need to do something, and we need to do something. So we are seeing that as a nice component happening out there. So that's good. That's been a good trend that we've seen over the last 3 to 5 years.
Thank you, Christopher. Does that tally with you, Christine?
Absolutely. And I think, the legal imperative is an important one, but that's essentially what you have to lose. And, loss avoidance is important, but actually what you have to gain is really much more significant for organisations. And that's true whether they're a government organisation thinking about citizen delivery, or whether they're a commercial organisation, or even a not-for-profit into community engagement. So whether it's cost efficiency, whether it's the innovation, whether it's revenue protection or revenue growth, these areas, the more mature organisations are beginning to realise that actually the business value of digital accessibility greatly exceeds the risk protection. And it's the risk protection that is the first priority for the less mature organisations stepping into it, because that's the most compelling. And as we've seen in some of the quotes and the direct comments in this survey, particularly people from government organisations where they're held to a very high legal bar, and they know that that's come through. That's the kind of first priority and first top of mind. But actually the real organizational value, as I say, whether it's commercial value or whether it's organizational value in a government efficiency of service delivery, or a service delivery into a community for not-for-profits, is going to be around who can and can't access the service, who can and can't efficiently use it and get the outcome that it's been designed for, and where in that process has that value been created. And as Christopher and I often talk about, it's the earlier in that process you can engage, the lower cost of that change and that efficiency into the business. So risk reduction is important, but it's actually, as a business driver, probably a much lesser strategic driver of overall business organizational value than some of these other elements that the more mature organizations are beginning to reach to.
Yeah, I wonder if we'll see the same kinds of results next year when we ask similar questions. So moving on to the second question, which is the findings that showed that digital accessibility is not embedded in most organizations represented. Obviously there's some great pockets of good practice, but what can organizations do to make improvements? If we start with Christine on that second question.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some really good indicators actually in the survey findings themselves. So, if we look at the percentage of organizations, as an example to start with, that feel digital accessibility is embedded, it went from 49% last year to 39% this year. Now that's an interesting finding, 10 percentage point difference. Now there's a different group of people that have completed it, but there'll be probably a lot of crossover to last year, and it's certainly reached out to through a similar network. But that difference, I'm wondering how much of it is people realizing what the real gap is as they become more mature in what accessibility is through the work IAAP, AbilityNet, and many others have done. So that just realization of, that's what it is, maybe we're not there yet. And how much of it is actually organizations going backwards because of spend priorities changing in a downturn market and a contracting market. And I know there were a couple of quotes that certainly lent to the latter of that. In teams had been contracted, they had lost a lot of colleagues, they had less time. So there's definitely a reality to both of those to some degree. It'll be interesting to know which. In terms of what makes it easier to embed capability, and why would you want to embed capability? I think actually let's take the second one first. Why would you want to embed capability? Because it makes for a much more efficient organization, an organization that delivers much more sustainably to a consistent value to your various stakeholders, whether they're employees, whether they're customers, whether they're citizens. So I think that back to that, putting it in early, building it into processes, building it into training, building it into people's roles, having clear leadership that has responsibility for keeping that aligned, because of course things go out of alignment over time. So having someone responsible for maintaining that alignment. And interestingly, actually also in a number of the organizations, there were some quotes about, well, we do it okay over here, but we're a really big organization. So it's also that alignment across different divisions, departments, regions. The larger the organization, the easier it is to have different points of maturity. Actually, that's a wonderful gift as well, because if you've got a high water line somewhere, it's much easier to take a high water line across internally than to bring it in from externally. So for all that creates a challenge in large organizations, it also creates a real opportunity, because someone somewhere will have done this to a differing degree or brought their part of the organization up to a differing degree internally already. So essentially embedding is about efficiency and about getting to that sustainable long-term value in a really in a way that makes it easy for new staff to come in, to move between organizations, to move between roles, and know what that means for them within their role, within their remit today.
Thank you. And yeah, we've got within the report, within the summary report that you can download shortly after the webinar, there is a kind of set of tips to follow for wherever you might be on the journey towards becoming an accessibility leader. Christopher, did you want to add your thoughts on that second question?
Yeah, I mean, I think Christine covered it so well. You almost wish, Christine, don't you wish that you could start off with startups, right? The organizations that are just going through accelerating programs and building accessibility right from the beginning. It'd be so much nicer. I must say, though, I'm really happy to hear that procurement leaned more to the positive, even though I'm disappointed with the other results. I think procurement, based on what we're hearing, continues to be where the bleeding is for organizations in regards to digital accessibility. The challenges out there to purchase products and services that are fully accessible or leaning towards being more accessible is very difficult. And there's a disconnect between the procurement offices and the individuals that hold the roles of procurement and the divisions that are requesting to purchase these accessible products and services. There needs to be, so if I was to say anything, that needs to continue to be to move towards that. Several years ago, when I first came on board, IAAP looked at doing a procurement certification, and it failed big time because we didn't have enough respondents based on our job analysis or survey. And that's something we have to do before we move forward on a certification. So I think that we saw there is that there's a disconnect between how do you read requirements about purchasing, understanding how to read them, how to write them from a procurement standpoint when you're actually writing your RFPs or your tenders out there. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that area and a connection. And there's some great models just in California, CSU in the States. There's a model which the California State University system used in order to bring in user testers and link them up to the vendors before they purchase anything that's tied to the university system. I know Christine has done a lot of work in this area. So I think we as the leaders in the field need to get that information out better and push it. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, we'd love to share, the way that works. So if you have a link or further information, we can include that in the webinar link afterwards. So just briefly on the third question, because I know we'd like to have some time for answering attendee questions. So results showed that user testing with disabled people was not done by the majority of respondents' organisations. So what would you say is the impact of this? So Christopher, maybe starting with you this time.
Yeah, I mean, this is such a problem with organizations. And I think Christine kind of hit on this with larger organizations that can wrap this into the life cycle of developing products and services, as well as just services being like, internal things like customer services and stuff like that. We hear a lot of times that the organizations can't find the end user, the person with a disability in this case, to do user experience, which we know is not the case. It's out there. Christine has a database that runs the gamut of people with disabilities in regards to functional limitations. So it's, again, I go back to the fact that is it the organization, who in the organization is making those decisions not to do that, not to include user testing into the life cycle, and how do we penetrate that in a sense? And I think, again, the smaller organizations, even they may not have as much resources, or the startups, they're really good. If we can get into those organizations more, I think we have a better chance of implementing that as they grow their organization. But again, it's that penetration of making sure the leaders know the importance of this.
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously a topic near and dear to my heart, because this is what Open Inclusion really do for our clients, is a lot of user engagement, obviously reports like this, market research as well, but user research, specifically thinking about design, the design research to inform better decisions. This is the point that people forget. Decisions are made. Research is being run. I mean, the research market globally is $90 billion. That's a B, 90 billion. And that market currently is quite exclusive of people with disabilities. There are very few organisations like ours that have reach and the practices, the tools and the skills to reach to people with disabilities in that research. The UX research market is a part of that, obviously employee research, customer experience research, and so on, market research within that. But money is being spent on research. If you started with people with disabilities rather than started with the easy to reach, and I'm using inverted commas here, respondents, you would actually get so much more value, because of course, in addition to people having a characteristic that is a disabling characteristic, in different environments, they have every part of their other characteristics. So you go straight through, across that experience curve in all their other characteristics. And if you bring people in from a number of very specific characteristics to kind of go to the edges in terms of dexterity or mobility or sight or hearing, or different ways people think and engage and understand and process information, then you'll just get a much, much richer set of insights to inform those decisions. Those decisions are still being made. Those decisions are still costing the organisation when they're not being made in a way that best supports the design of that particular digital environment, whether it's an internal digital environment or an external one. So it's just informing better decisions. And for all that we love having standards, because they're standard, therefore they're able to be picked up by anyone and be able to be used and understood, they can't be relevant to your environment by default, because they have to be relevant to every environment. So when you're thinking about, I'm a higher education institution providing high quality online and in-person education and tools to my students, or I'm a bank providing, retail business and commercial banking services to, a large group, these two things aren't the same. And it's wonderful when you do research, because your users, your various, consumers, citizens, and so on, will tell you what's the important thing in the job to be done in that particular digital service. Where is the friction and where are the barriers in that particular digital service? And that just informs more efficient decision making. The audits are important because they can give you some of the stuff that you can clean up that can be picked up in that generic way, but they can never work across your specific journeys because they're not designed for your specific journeys. And they've got to work across any digital environment. And once you look at it specifically for an app or a kiosk or a website in this journey, it becomes so much easier to know what's the right question and who's the right person to bring to this to inform that decision in a really efficient way. I should mention one thing I saw in the research where someone was talking about using their ERG as user researchers. I'd just like to call out this practice. People in your ERG are usually, and not always, but usually offering their time in addition to their day job without having a particular piece of time set aside for that. They're still held to the same level of expectation as their peers who are not in an ERG and assessed against that. If you're also using them as user testers, that's another layer of job and value they're bringing into the organisation that might not be fully reflected and respected for work and skills that they're bringing in. That's the first element. The second part is they can't unknow the expertise they have about the industry they're in. So they're not a standard customer. If they're working, back to in a banking environment, even if they're not a banker, they can't unknow all the experience they have of having worked in a financial services organisation for that long, however long that is. So they're not reflecting the reality of your actual users, citizens or consumers. So, you know, to really think through when might you use an internal group and when that be either misleading or inappropriate when thinking about who you bring to test products. It's not to say that there's never a time for that and a quick and dirty to just check in on something and so on, but just to be a little reflective before deciding to use internal staff for external testing, in the same way that you would be for any user testing. In fact, it's just the same. So if you think that that would be appropriate for user testing to make the next decision about your product generally, then maybe it's appropriate here. If it wouldn't be appropriate in general user testing or research, it's probably not appropriate here.
Thank you so much, both of you. Just looking at the time, I think we'll wrap up the panel questions there, but I know there's a lot of questions that have come through, and do feel free to drop your question into the Q&A section. And just to highlight, the full summary reports and the detailed Word download will be available later on today, highlighted on, you can access it at /attitudes or /attitudes webinar. So just moving on to the questions that have come through, we've just got probably time for maybe one or two. There's one question from Chris who says, do you believe that disability and accessibility are adequately considered within the principles of ESG, so environmental, social and governance? Christopher, would you like to jump in on that one?
Just read that one more time. It went out just for a second.
Oh, that's okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. Do you believe that disability and accessibility are adequately considered within the principles of ESG, so environmental, social and governance?
Wow, that's a question. This is Christopher. I want to say yes, but to be honest with you, I still think we've got a long way to go, and I would have to push back on that right now.
Yeah. Christine, would you agree?
Absolutely. And I think, I do quite a lot of work in DEI groups such as the DEI Council for the Market Research Society in the UK. And, even having disability within that council is a very new thing. So, I think it feels like one of the later people to that table and one of the lesser voices at that table. And that's something that we need to address. And also just recognizing that disability itself is an incredibly diverse community, and it does cross all other characteristics of human diversity. So whether it's ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, and so on, disability impacts all of these communities, and all of the experiences that are relevant to those communities impact the disability experience, because multiple marginalization creates some of the worst experiences we've found in the past. So it's a really important question. I would absolutely agree with Christopher. A long way to go.
Well, a kind of connected question, but is one that's come through for Christopher. How does the IAAP or you yourself reflect on the maturity of the accessibility profession generally? What's driving any progress that you can see? And are there any positives we can all build on? It's quite a chunky question, so it might be one to save for the webinar.
Yeah, but I'll nutshell just real quickly. We are seeing a movement in maturity in organizations, and we see this through the increase of our membership, individual memberships, which have gone 2 years ago we will increase our individual membership 36%. And then last year was 25%, so a little bit lower. Our org members were 87% increase, and then it was 40% last year. So there's kind of a fluctuation, but what's happening is we're seeing, at least on job postings within LinkedIn and other areas, certifications or accessibility, whether it's tied to IAAP or not, being recognized in these job postings from organizations. So I think that is growing. We're having a hard time tracking that, but we're seeing an increase, and I don't know the percentage, but we're doing the best we kind of doing that we can do to track that within LinkedIn. So that's pretty exciting. We're also talking to organizations, very large organizations, about tailoring their benefits for their employees. So as part of a membership organization for IAAP, there's an umbrella, and all the employees that are tied to that registrar for that membership, we work with them on how to best integrate accessibility into the organization. So there's more discussions around that than we've ever had, and that's pretty exciting. So something's happening, not just with IAAP, I think globally with other organizations.
I'd love to just add a little bit to that, Annie, which is we certainly are feeling that. So, and in fact, I see a question around size of organization. We're seeing that at very large organizations. We're seeing that actually in smaller, both startups, people kind of starting up, exactly as you said, Christopher, with accessibility in mind right at the forefront at the very beginning, and that being a differentiating capability and an innovating capability. But we're also seeing it with large organizations that 5 years ago might have been focused on accessibility, then kind of moving through in maturity to inclusive usability, moving through to now kind of considering experience design, but inclusive experience design, so designing for delight, joy, and consistent value. And actually a number of leading organizations now looking at this as an innovation trigger and starting at human diversity to really understand how they can differentiate in market and how they can innovate in a much more powerful way, but also a way that is been under considered by their peers for a long time. So we've seen that maturity in the time that Open's been around, and the quality and level of conversations that we have now are quite different even with similar organizations. And the startup community and the SME community kind of is pushing that in a really lovely way, because they're finding the gaps that the big organizations are leaving, and they're stepping into that with an inclusion first and a disability inclusion first lens.
Fantastic, positive strides going on. So thank you so much, Christine, Christopher, Orla with My Clear Text today, and my colleagues Louise, Kelly and Freya, who are helping in the background. So I just wanted to share with you a little bit more information that might be of interest. So Freya, if you're okay to show the slides, that would be great. Thank you. We also run online training sessions on digital accessibility and inclusion. So you can find out more at /training. And if you use the code AbilityNet Webinar 10 when booking, you can save 10% on all our courses. Coming up include our hugely popular courses, so PDF accessibility, accessibility for developers, and InDesign accessibility. And we also have options for staff training via e-learning, so staff can complete those online at any time. And we're focusing on helping you to help yourselves produce accessible content. So you can check that out at accessible-content-resources. And then coming up in November, we have the return of TechShare Pro from the 14th to the 15th of November. So do join us to be part of Europe's largest gathering of accessibility and inclusion professionals, and you can get tickets at techsharepro.com. And then just finally, you can also sign up to our newsletter. We have accessibility services for all types of organisation. And then don't forget about our free webinars like this one, which you can access at /webinars. So thanks again to everyone who's joined us, and please do complete the feedback form you'll be directed to, and we'll be in touch with you soon. Bye everyone.